Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Catholic Talk. I'm joined today by Father Vincent Lampert, who is a Catholic priest in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis in the USA, and he is also an exorcist, and that is the topic we'll be discussing today, exorcism. So, Father Vincent, I'm going to go straight in with my first question, which I'm sure isn't unique and you've had many times before. What made you become an exorcist?
The Catholic bishop in every diocese is the bishop, and then a bishop at his discretion can appoint one or more of his priests to do this ministry in his name. So in 2005, the Archbishop of Indianapolis appointed me to take on this role. So it really wasn't a job that I was seeking, but it was one that the bishop appointed me to. And when a priest is ordained, he promises obedience to his bishop and to his successors. And the Archbishop told me that he selected me because he wanted a priest who believed in the reality of evil, but not one who would be too quick to believe that everyone who came to me who thought they were dealing with the demonic, that was the actual case.
Yeah, because I was going to say, it seems that, I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a case where a priest or someone has gone into the priesthood then thinking, when I'm a priest, I'm going to want to be an exorcist. It sounds like it's something more that's just asked of you at a certain point in your priesthood.
Yes, I think bishops, what they do is they kind of size up their priest, if you will, and then decide which of their priests may be best to take on this ministry. It's interesting that you point that out because I've talked to some young men who tell me they want to be an exorcist, so they want to be ordained a priest to do the role. But again, it's at the discretion of the bishop to make that decision, and one does not go into the priesthood saying they want to do specialized ministry.
Right. You mentioned one of the things that might be considered when thinking about whether to, say, come with this offer to a priest of exorcism, and that was, is this person likely to think they can see the demonic everywhere rather than sort of discern where it actually is? What other things might be looked at in terms of whether a priest is good for this kind of role?
I think part of it is priestly maturity. So a priest newly ordained probably is not the best candidate to take this on. Coming right out of a seminary, the priest is still trying to create his own priestly identity, but then to take on this role would be a lot, I think, in the initial years of being a priest. So I was appointed after I had been ordained for 14 years. So I was ordained a priest back in June of 1991 and then was appointed to be the exorcist in 2005. So I think having some level of spiritual maturity is also a very important component. I always think that seminaries will train priests on how to be a priest, but you don't really know what that means until you start to take on the role and you actually start doing the ministry itself. So I think it's the same way with being an exorcist. The priest needs to have a strong priestly identity, being rooted in prayer, very, very important. And then demonstrating a certain spiritual maturity makes him a good candidate for the bishop to consider whether or not he might appoint him to the ministry in his diocese.
Okay. So as far as exorcisms themselves, how do they come about? Does somebody get in touch usually and say, I have someone in my family who I think is possessed? Does a priest sort of see someone and think, you know, this person looks like they might be possessed, we might need to do something? How do they even come about to start with?
Because I'm publicly known, I receive a high volume of people who contact me literally from all over the world. Before COVID-19, I was getting about 2,000 phone calls and emails a year. Now I'm getting about 3,500. And there is a protocol that most dioceses will have in place, meaning if one believes they're dealing with the demonic or a loved one is dealing with the demonic, the very first thing that they should do is go and talk to their local parish priest so he can listen to them, pray with them, perhaps hear their confession, provide the sacramental life of the church. And then if need be, the priest at the parish should be the one to contact the exorcist in the diocese. It's kind of like if somebody's sick, you don't call a specialist right away. You would go and see your family physician or doctor, who would then assess you and then would make a referral if they believe that that was what the person truly needed. So, at least in my diocese, we do have a protocol that if somebody believes they're dealing with the demonic, they should go and speak to their parish priest. If they're not Catholic, and it's important to note that the Catholic Church does minister to people from other faith traditions and sometimes no faith background whatsoever, but it's always best for the person to go and speak with their spiritual leader of whatever faith they belong to receive some kind of guidance and direction.
Okay. So let's say the decision is taken, somebody needs to have an exorcism. What kind of conditions need to be met? What kind of preparation needs to be done by the priest before they even begin to do something like this, if any?
Well, here in the United States, we have an American protocol. So exorcists are in many ways trained to be skeptics. I should be the last person to believe that somebody is truly dealing with extraordinary demonic activity in their life. So the protocol, step number one would be for the person to have some type of mental health evaluation. And it isn't necessarily that the church doesn't believe the person, but even if the person is possessed, they're going to need to be in a strong mental state before going through this particular rite of the church. Step two of the protocol would be for the person to have a medical examination to rule out any physical cause for what they're going through. Now, it's important to note that the church is not asking the psychologist or the doctor, do you think this person is possessed? The church herself will make that determination, but the church wants the best possible information. The church says that as an exorcist, I need to reach moral certitude, meaning beyond a doubt, the person in front of me is truly dealing with extraordinary demonic activity. So I rely on the opinion of these experts to help me reach moral certitude. I would then meet with the person and do an intake questionnaire, trying to determine what was the entry point for the demonic into the person's life. Step number four, I would look for 4 signs that the church has indicated are possible signs that a person is possessed: the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown to the individual, having superhuman strength, having elevated perception, meaning the person knows things that they shouldn't otherwise know, and then finally an aversion to anything of a sacred nature, such as being blessed with holy water, being shown a crucifix, having passages of the Bible read in front of them. And then step 5 of the protocol, which is probably one of the most important, is to normalize the spiritual life of the person. It's not just a matter of casting the evil out, God has to be invited in. And people probably need to realize that in an exorcism, the main focus is not on the devil or his demons. Really, the main focus is on God and the power and the authority of the name of Jesus Christ. So it's really about bringing people back into a relationship with Jesus Christ, or bringing them into that relationship for the very first time. I always like to say that in an exorcism, Jesus is not a bystander, he's the main actor. If people are relying on me, I like to say we're all in trouble. But if people are relying on the person of Christ in their life, then that's exactly the right mindset that people need to have.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about certainly at the beginning, really trying to be absolutely certain that someone is possessed. It kind of reminds me of when you read about, miraculous, for example, in Lourdes, miraculous cures, where the church does a heck of a lot to sort of be absolutely sure. Like, they don't just, anytime anyone says, oh, I've been miraculously cured, they won't just put it in their book and say, okay, well, we'll note that down. They do a lot of things, examinations, medical records, all these things to try and be absolutely sure. And even with apparitions, there's a lot of questioning of the people involved and witnesses. So people sometimes think, oh, the church just will put anything in. No, they'll actually be the most kind of suspicious and make sure that this is absolutely certain. So I have a few things that I'm going to ask you. These are kind of things that I've heard about exorcisms, and I'm going to just basically ask you if they're true or false, if there's any truth in them, or if they're old wives' tales. So the first thing I've heard is that demons don't like Latin. When you pray to them in Latin, it specifically seems to bother them. Is that true in any way?
That is true, because Latin is the official language of the church, and the devil would hate the church, because one of my favorite definitions of the church is that it's the guardian to the tree of life. It's the instrument that Christ has given to us so that we can approach eternal life. You think of the story of the fall of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. Once they were cast out of the garden, then the flaming sword and the cherub were put there so that they could not approach the tree of life. So the church is the vehicle that gives us the possibility to approach the tree of life and then to enter into eternal life with God the Father. And the devil believes that if he could destroy the church, then humanity would be permanently trapped in sin, as are he and his demons. So again, the demons would hate Latin because it is the official language of the church.
Okay, another one, and this, I think this one's going to sound a bit more peculiar. That's why I really want to ask you it. I've heard, because of sort of the demon's hate for people, that supposedly, and I don't know, maybe if this is something you'll get during an exorcism, to be honest, but certainly just generally, I've heard that they really don't like dogs because dogs are loyal to human beings, and that makes them hate dogs. Is there truth to that, or is that just made up?
I would say that that one's made up. I've not heard that one before, so that's not something that I'm familiar with.
Okay, and the third thing that I've heard, if you'd have during an exorcism a number of people in the room while that exorcism is taking place, that if there's a weak link, if somebody in that room is, for some reason, whether they're unconfessed or there's something about them that's considered weaker, the demon would go for that person in the room.
That is true. So when a demon manifests, it will try to size up everybody in the room, determine who the weakest link is, and then try to verbally attack that person, sometimes physically attack them, which is why in an exorcism, nobody is there out of a sense of curiosity. I like to say there's no such thing as exorcism tourism. So nobody is just there for the fun of it, but everybody that's present has been selected to be there by the exorcist. Obviously, I would be there. I would prepare myself as a priest by celebrating Mass, going to confession, spending time in prayer, determining where the exorcism will take place. It's always in a sacred space because the demon doesn't get to determine where it will be defeated. The church herself will make that determination. Obviously, the person who's possessed will be there. They come with a family member or a friend. And then I would invite other people, maybe other priests, deacons, or lay people, but they are there to simply pray. So as I'm doing the rite, they would be in the background simply praying, maybe praying the rosary, for example. But they're there to be prayer warriors, not there out of a sense of curiosity. And again, the demons will size up people, and whoever is the weakest link will be the one that the demon will try to attack as a way to disrupt the prayer of the church.
And as far as being the weakest link, I mean, what kind of thing could make someone the weakest link? Would, for example, not being in a state of grace be a very bad thing? Or is there any other things that could make someone quite weak in that instance?
If somebody's not in a state of grace, if there's unconfessed sins, anybody that's present has to go to confession beforehand, because whenever we confess our sins, we place them in the hands of God. And once we place them in the hands of God, the devil cannot use those things against us. Oftentimes, people feel guilty about going to confession, but confession is not about being on a guilt trip. It's about recognizing that the greatest thing that we can know is God's love and mercy. We even have the, Divine Mercy Sunday coming up soon. And that's an opportunity for us to really experience God's unconditional love for us. And again, the demon could spout out unconfessed sins, again, as a way to make the person feel guilty and vulnerable, and again as a way to disrupt the prayer of the church. So not being in the state of grace is certainly one of the main ways that a demon can try to determine who the weakest link in the room is.
Yeah, I've certainly heard of such an incident. Someone told me about. I think there were a few priests in a room, and one of the priests, maybe they hadn't confessed their sins, because apparently the person who was possessed then started just saying all the sins of that priest to the priest, and it completely frightened that priest. And I think he left because he just couldn't believe what was happening. You mentioned the physical attacks. How much? Because I mean, I've heard also this kind of idea that the demonic can't hurt us physically, but you say that you can be attacked physically by them. To what kind of extent can they harm someone physically?
The church recognizes 4 different types of extraordinary demonic activity. So we've been talking about demonic possession. There can be demonic infestation, the presence of evil in a location or associated with an object. Demonic vexation would be physical attacks. Somebody's getting marks or bites or bruises on their body that are being caused by a demon. And there can be demonic obsession, which are mental attacks. So physical attacks would just come about if somebody has done something to open up an entry point for the demonic in their life. Usually people that are experiencing demonic vexation, the physical attacks, will experience these attacks at night, maybe while they're trying to sleep. And the demons do these things as a way to try to disturb them. But when it comes to demonic vexation, the person has done something to create an entry point for the demonic into their life. I will say that there's something called demonic oppression, and these can be physical attacks as well. But the person has not done anything to open up a doorway for the demonic into their life. When it comes to demonic oppression, it's a gift from God. God allows the person to be attacked by the devil or some other evil spirit as an opportunity for the person to show their fidelity to God. We can think of Satan or of Job in the Old Testament when God permitted Satan to afflict him. And it wasn't that Job had done anything wrong, but God permitted Satan to afflict him to test him. If people know the story of Job, even his wife says to Job, when he's literally lost everything, he's put on sackcloth, he's sitting in ashes, his wife says, "Curse God and die." But then Job beats his breast and says, "The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Meaning, if things be good, I glorify God. If things be bad, I glorify God. My personal situation means nothing when it comes to God's rightful place in my life. St. Paul himself was oppressed. He talked about the thorn in the flesh, the messenger from Satan sent to torment him to keep him from becoming proud. Many of the great saints of the church, St. John Vianney, St. Padre Pio, they all experienced some type of oppression. But again, oppression can be physical attacks, but they are a gift from God as an opportunity for the person to show their fidelity to God, and then as a result, to grow in holiness and virtue.
Okay. So if it isn't oppression, if someone has done something to open themselves up to the demonic, what kind of things could someone do that would open them up?
In the 17 years I've done this ministry, some of the main ways that I've seen that people open up entry points for the demonic would be ties to the occult. So the word occult comes from the Latin word occultus, meaning hidden or secret. People are dabbling in magic and witchcraft. They're going to see psychics or mediums. They're using pendulums or crystals, trying to reach out to the dead. So all of these practices are condemned in the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament because they're a form of idolatry. They violate the first commandment where God says, "I am the Lord your God. You shall not have strange gods before me." And when people turn to the occult, they're turning to a substitute for God. And when people look for a substitute for God, is when they can open up a doorway to evil. I think the entertainment industry today is another avenue that people open up a doorway to the demonic in their life. The devil can play on a person's memory and imagination. And if people are caught up in a lot of movies and TV shows and video games and whatnot that have a strong demonic theme to them, then again, the devil can use that as a way to try to get inside of a person's mind. Other ways that I've seen, if somebody has been cursed, curse is trying to do harm to someone with the help of the devil or his demons. Curses are only effective if somebody is weak in their faith, because we can't control what somebody else may want to do to us, how they may want to harm us with the help of the devil. But if we are standing strong in our faith, then we don't need to worry about curses. You know, St. Paul in his letter to the Ephesians talks about putting on the armor of Christ. Psalm 91, I need not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day. So if somebody is weak in their faith and somebody curses them, that can create an entry point for the demonic into their life. Abuse can also create an entry point whereby somebody may turn to other sources to deal with the brokenness in their life. I've worked with people who, because they were abused, kind of blame God for that. And then they turned to people that were involved in witchcraft and magic who said that they could help put their lives back together, but it only left them even broken even more. So again, there can be many ways. And as an exorcist, I try to determine what the entry point was so that using the prayer of the church, that entry point can be closed, the demon can be cast out, and then the person can be led into a deeper relationship with God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you say about television and the entertainment industry, sometimes even in the past when I've just realized how much stuff is in the head that's all come from these kind of things, and you realize what you've let in almost subconsciously by just sitting there watching these kind, even just programs that supposedly seem, some of them just seem fine and normal, but they have all kinds of subliminal messages in them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so is there a way to determine the difference between someone who is possessed and it's kind of a gift from God to see if they can glorify God in fighting it off in some way, or if they've actually allowed a demon in because they've done something they shouldn't be doing?
When I was appointed back in 2005, I became only one of about 12 exorcists in the United States. Today, that number has grown to more than 125 priests who've been authorized to do this ministry. The church says the best way to learn how to be an exorcist is the apprenticeship model, so to work under a more seasoned exorcist. Because there really wasn't someone in the United States that I could train under, my bishop sent me to Rome. So in 2006, I lived near the Vatican for 3 months. I was able to find a Franciscan priest who allowed me to mentor under him. And then the time that I was in Rome, I was able to participate in 40 exorcisms and then to learn firsthand the church's ministry to those who were up against the forces of evil and who were seeking the help of the church. So again, it's very important to kind of gain that wisdom from priests who've been doing this for many, many years. So that experience with the priest helped me to clearly understand maybe people who were dealing with a mental health issue, maybe somebody had a physical condition. And then, as a priest, my goal is to give people the help that they truly need, not that the help that they think they need. And I will say that most of the people, by the time they've contacted me, they have self-diagnosed, meaning they believe they're dealing with the demonic. But I have to go back to square one. I can't just accept what they believe to be happening. I have to follow the proper protocols of the church. And I always believe that the church would be doing greater harm if she labels the person as being possessed, and that label prevents them from getting the true help they need, either from their medical doctor or from the mental health field. So again, it's kind of wisdom comes with age, being able to discern what is truly demonic and what is something that may be of a mental health issue or of a physical condition.
So going into some of the exorcisms that you've performed, have you ever had a situation where someone was literally just basically lying, like trying to get you to believe that they were possessed, but they knew they weren't. They were just trying to see how far they could take it.
I have not had that experience because, again, the church says there's really no such thing as an emergency exorcism. So, again, it's a process of arriving at the point where the church says that an exorcism should be performed. I know of priests in the ministry who jumped in right away thinking that the person was possessed, and that really wasn't the case. Or maybe the person was possessed, but because they didn't follow the proper protocol. One colleague told me that during an exorcism, when the demon manifested, he got punched in the face. Because when somebody is possessed, the demon will take over the person's body, treating that body as if it were its own, using the person's eyes to see, their ears to hear, their mouth to speak. And once the demon manifests, then the whole actions of the individual are now defined by the demon and not by that person. That's going back to elevated perception. So is it the person in front of me speaking, or is it the demon who is now speaking? And again, experience teaches the exorcist to know when somebody is truly possessed or if they're just trying to put on a ruse. Sometimes people do that deliberately. They just want to see if they can make a mockery of the church. Sometimes people do that because they're dealing with a mental health condition. I had a gentleman one time that I worked with who was diagnosed as being schizophrenic. So his priest sent him to me, and I talked with him and determined that he was not dealing with the demonic. But I didn't want to just say to him, it's not the demonic, go on your way. So I arranged a meeting with myself and him, his psychiatrist, and his caseworker, where we could meet. And I told the man in the front of everyone that he was not possessed. And then the psychiatrist says to the man, Father says you're not possessed. How do you respond? And I found his response to be rather interesting. He said, I'm disappointed. And he said to the psychiatrist, you can give me the label saying that I'm schizophrenic, but you can't tell me why. If it's the devil, I have my why.
Yeah, that's interesting because then you could just say this is the reason. Now let's try and cure it with an exorcism.
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of questions. Firstly, you might not have an exact number, I don't know, but how many more or less exorcisms have you done in your life? And then secondly, could you go through maybe one or two of the kind of most serious ones or the longest ones that you remember?
So I would say when it comes to true demonic possession, I've done around 12 exorcisms. So the full rite of the church. When it comes to demonic infestation, demonic vexation, demonic obsession, I've done thousands of those exorcisms over the past 17 years. Now, true demonic possession, some cases, I did an exorcism just a couple of years ago. The person had been away from the church for many years. As an exorcist, I hear a lot of horrific stories. So this lady was 50 years old. She was from Mexico. And she told me that when she was growing up in Mexico, at the age of 7, her father began to rape her over a period of 5 years. When she turned 12, her father then turned his attention to her younger sister. She was broken. She was shattered. She blamed God for what had happened. So she fell away from the church. And in her culture, she turned to curanderos and brujas. She turned to witch doctors and witches who said that they could help put the pieces of her life back together. So she just found herself to be even shattered and broken even more, because that's what the demonic would do. He would take brokenness and isolation and then try to escalate it to such a higher degree that the person loses all sense of hope and joy in their life, and they just feel completely all alone. So I'm meeting with this lady at a church in Indianapolis. She brings a friend with her. I have another priest with me. And then she's looking at me and she's crying and she says to me, will you help me? And as she said that, I looked at her and said, well, Jesus is going to help you. And as soon as I said that, her eyeballs turned green and her pupils became slanted like a serpent. And this very deep growling voice came out of her mouth and said, "Who's he? He has no power over us." Now, the friend sitting next to her was so terrified, literally jumped over the table to get away from her. The other priest sitting next to me, he was a younger priest, and he was so scared that he began praying the Hail Mary prayers, just one after another, even fell to his knees. And I immediately got up and I went over and laid my hands on the head of this person, and looking at the demon, began to say a prayer. And then the demon growled and snarled at me and began throwing out obscenities. And then I reached in my pocket and took out some holy water and blessed the person. And then the demon shrieked and screamed and collapsed to the floor. Now, I didn't do an exorcism at that time because it wasn't the time or the place. I needed to prepare myself. I needed to determine the location. So I did an exorcism on that lady the following week. And we were in a church. And as soon as the ritual began, the demon manifested again. There's the green eyes and the slanted pupils. And the demon says to me, "You can't get rid of us. We've been here too long, and you're not strong enough." And then, the prayer of the church begins by uh, doing the blessing the person with holy water, reminding us of our baptism into Christ, doing the litany of the saints, calling upon the saints and our Blessed Mother to be present during this prayer of the church, reading a scripture. One part of the rite is the insufflation prayer, and that's the breathing onto the face of the person, invoking the Holy Spirit, because wherever the Holy Spirit is truly present, an unclean spirit cannot remain. So when I breathed on the face of this person during the rite of exorcism, the person was sitting in a chair. The chair flew back about 3 meters, and then there was a shriek and a scream, and the person come flying out of the chair and collapsed on the floor. Then myself and the other priest lifted the person off the floor, and she was literally glowing. One of the ways that I've been able to determine that a demon has truly been cast out is that the person glows. So people should think of a painting of a saint where you see a halo around their head. It's not their glory they're radiating the glory of God. So in this case, that exorcism just took 45 minutes for the demon to be cast out. And sometimes the length of time will be determined by the extent of the demonic infestation, if you will, into the person's life. I've worked with another person that it lasted over a year. There were 7 demons that gave their names during the exorcism. Oftentimes, when somebody is possessed, the demons will act in a cluster, meaning there are lower ranking demons and a higher ranking demon. We know that there is a hierarchy in the angelic world, and there is a hierarchy in the demonic world. So in this case, the 6 weakest demons had been cast out, but the one dominant demon told me its name was Leviathan, and that it was not going anywhere because the person had invited the demon into their life. So the lady I was working with told me that she had been praying outside of an abortion clinic in one of the states here in the US. She believed that a woman going in for an abortion was acting as if she was possessed. She ran up to her, looked her in the face, and said, "Whatever in you, I freely invite to come into me." So she did, in a notion of misguided charity, invite the demon in. So again, I worked with them for over a year. Every time a priest prays an exorcism prayer over somebody, it will provide some relief, even if it doesn't provide total liberation at that point. We could say that every prayer of the church will weaken the demon to some degree. So about a year after I began working with this person, we were in a convent chapel here in the state of Indiana. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I told the demon Leviathan to say, "Hail Mary, full of grace," and to leave immediately. The demon looked at me and laughed and said, "Grace of full," wouldn't say the name of our Blessed Mother. She is a powerful ally for anyone who's up against the forces of evil. At that time, a school bell rings. There's now 400 children pouring out onto the parking lot just outside of this convent chapel. The demon looks at me and with this hideous look and says, if you stop praying, I will stop screaming. But if you keep praying, I'm going to start screaming so loud that people are going to hear the voice and they're going to come in here and see what you're doing. And then you're going to have to stop anyway. So I looked at the demon and said, I command you to obey me in all things, although an unworthy minister of Christ, to say the words, Hail Mary, full of grace, in that order, and to leave immediately. And the demon that had been speaking in a very deep voice looked at me and in a child's voice said, Hail Mary, full of grace. There was a shriek and a scream, and then the demon was cast out. And there the person in front of me is glowing again. Again, the sign that evil is gone and the person is now radiating the glory of God.
Oh, that's amazing. You mentioned in there about the lady who the reason she was possessed was because she kind of, in a misguided way, she said, may the demon come on to me and leave you. And that shows that demons can go from one person to another. Can they only do that if the person invites them in? Or could they, for example, do that during an exorcism? They just go into another person who happens to be in the room.
The person would have to invite the demon in. So demons aren't free just to jump from one person to another. A person can invite the demon in either directly or indirectly. So directly, in this case, when the woman said, what's ever in you, I invite to come into me. Indirectly, when maybe people are dabbling in the occult, again, thinking that something is fun or entertaining, but they don't really understand the gravity of the situation and what they may be getting themselves into. Demons are very legalistic and authoritative. So if somebody gives them, an entry point, they're going to take it. Sometimes, you know, there's a game board, people talk about a Ouija board, for example. People think that can just be fun and entertaining. But again, just because we think something is fun or entertaining doesn't mean that the demon won't use that as a way of saying, no, by playing with this game, you've given me the right to enter into your life. So just because people are ignorant of situations doesn't mean that they're going to be completely free of possibly inviting a demon into their life. That's why it's so important for people to be well educated about the demonic world and the importance of faith. It's one of the reasons why I like to be public about talking about exorcisms and what the church believes and teaches. Because if people truly understand their faith, then evil really is nothing to fear. For Catholics, I always say, if you're praying, if you're reading the Bible, if you're going to Mass, if you're celebrating the sacramental life of the church, the devil is already on the run. But there's a lot of people today who are maybe nominal in their faith. There's a lot of young people today who have left the faith. And because of that, they could be opening themselves up to the world of the demonic.
Yes. Now, some people might have this idea. They might say, if we look at sort of how many souls there are in the world, there are so many souls. And in some cases, it seems as though the demons or Satans have so many of them, just even when it comes to sort of ideologies that people support, there's so many en masse that the Satan can just get convinced to come over to him, to his side. They might wonder why demons would bother to, take over the body of one person, for example, when they can get so many at once in so many areas. Why would they go to all that trouble? So I suppose my question would be, why would they go to all that trouble to just possess one person here or somewhere else?
The answer really is at the very core of our Christian identity. So, what's the greatest thing that God has done for us? The incarnation. God took on human form in the person of Jesus Christ. Because the devil wishes to mimic God in every way, one of the ways that he believes that he takes on human form is by possessing a human body. If you think about it, a human person is God's greatest creation. because we are created in the image and likeness of God. And when the devil or some other demon possesses a human body, they distort that image. So demons believe that they can indirectly attack God by attacking humans who are created in the image and likeness of God. So it's really a way of trying to get back at God, if you will. And it is true that demons would prefer to kind of work on the sidelines. There's a great quote from the 17th century philosopher Charles Pierre Baudelaire that says, "The devil's cleverest ruse is to convince us that he does not exist." But in an exorcism, demons are forced to reveal themselves. They don't want to reveal themselves, but the very things that the church is doing in an exorcism antagonizes the demon so much that it finally lashes out and reveals itself. And then once it reveals itself, the battle against the demon would begin. But again, demons would prefer to afflict people and kind of remain hidden. But the prayer of the church does force them to reveal themselves so that the battle against them can begin.
Okay, and so my final question is going to be relating to priests. Have you yourself run into, or have you heard of an instance where a priest has been possessed? And if this has happened, how does that come about? Because it would almost seem to me like a demon managing to possess a priest would be far more of like a trophy in a way to a demon than even just an ordinary person. Have you heard of such an instance or run into such a thing, and how would that even come about?
I have not run into the situation where a priest has been possessed. I've run into the situation where priests can be experiencing demonic oppression. God can permit them to be attacked as a way to show their fidelity to God. And I've known priests in the ministry of exorcism who've actually left the priesthood. So they've reached the degree of so much demonic activity in their own lives that they just couldn't deal with it anymore, and they've left the priesthood. So in a certain way, the devil can use that as an opportunity to try to claim some victory. So I've probably known 3 exorcism priests who have left the priesthood in the years that I've been doing this ministry, because it can be all consuming. The devil knows who's working to defeat him and then can really try to attack that priest in his prayer life, in his personal life, spiritual life. You know, every priest that I know who does this ministry is also a parish priest, so is responsible for a congregation and the normal everyday life of a priest, praying with people, doing weddings and funerals and daily mass, so those types of things. But the devil will try to disrupt all of that as a way to get the priest to leave the priesthood, because if the priest leaves the priesthood, there's collateral damage. Then people start wondering, the faithful in the congregation, well, what was wrong with the priest? Why did he leave? And so it can kind of create a crisis of faith in the lives of many people.
Indeed. And are those priests who left the priesthood, did they then find that the demonic kind of backed away from them because they no longer needed to, they weren't concerned by them anymore or something like that?
And that would be a good question, because I haven't maintained contact with them after they've left. They kind of wanted to have their own life and be left alone. But my sense would be that the devil would not leave them alone. If he knows that he's been victorious on one level in trying to destroy their life, I think he would just keep doing that even more and more as a way to completely destroy that individual.
Well, Father Vincent, that's all I have today. Thank you very much for answering all those questions, for giving me your time.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you again, and God bless you. Thank you very much. I'll leave you now, Father. I appreciate you chatting
Okay.
with me. Thank you again, and I wish you a good
Remind me
day.
again, you are located where?
I'm in the UK. I'm in London, so
You're
I'm
in London. Okay.
in London. Never been to the USA, but I would like to go at some point to visit. But yes,
There's
I
a,
will.
there's a,
Yeah.
I was going to say, there's a lady that I encountered over the internet from London, a
Okay.
fallen away Catholic, and because of the ministry of exorcism, she is reconnected with her Catholic faith.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's good.
So, yeah. So
That's
there's
very
lots
good.
of good stories about this ministry that's not necessarily just about dealing with the demonic directly,
Yeah,
but it also helps reconnect people to their faith.
absolutely. I mean, I live in England, and I'll be honest, England is not a particularly religious country. And sometimes I almost feel like you're probably less likely to get people possessed here because the devil. I mean, I don't want to be so cynical about it, but it's almost like most of his work is done. When I just look around, I just feel like most people, whether it's where I work or where I studied or wherever, they just don't believe. Um,
Well,
it's
there
very
is
sad.
something called perfect possession,
Hmm.
and that's where a person is possessed by a demon, but they live in a harmonious relationship with the demon.
Oh.
It's almost like they've united their will with the will of the demon. So there is no need for manifestations.
Hmm.
The manifestations would be an indication that there's still an internal battle taking place where the individual is resisting the demonic presence in their life.
Hmm.
I had I did an interview one time here in the United States where a young lady called in and she said, I grew up Christian, but I'm an atheist now. And you said that going to like these ghost hunting things, these tours that they have in the United States, a lot of cities in the southern states will have ghost hunting tours. She said, I go to all that. And she goes, I've never been attacked by any demons. So how do you explain that?
Hmm.
I said, well, you've answered your own question. There's no need for the demon to attack you because you've already surrendered to the demonic in your life. So there's no need for a battle to take place.
Yeah, yeah. She willingly
And
goes.
even in today's society, Christianity built Western civilization. And there's a difference between what I would say exorcisms performed in the apostate world and in the pagan world. So areas where the good news has never been heard, if somebody's possessed, the exorcisms are immediate and effective. But in the apostate world, so think of people who grew up in a Christian home but then abandoned their faith, it does seem that demons have a greater claim on these people because they knew the truth, but they walked away from it.
Indeed. It's chilling, isn't it?
Yes.
But yeah, okay. Well, Father,
All
once
right.
again, thank you very
Very
much.
good. Yes.
Thank you very much for everything, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.